Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk about the role of planning in the social governance of the subsurface. And drawing on the French case, I will try to explain how different uh, policies have been put in place in France in order to overcome some of the main breaks that have plagued the subsurface industry in France. So a few slides about the general context in France. First of all, France has a long history of subsurface industry, but it's a middle player in the subsurface industry. It has a few resources, but important companies such as Total, Imerys, Orano, or Eramet in the mineral industries, and also important geological survey such as the BIGM. But in the 80s and the 90s, there have been a decrease in the oil and gas production in France, but also the closures of mines, and it has resulted into uh, a lack of political interest toward the subsurface industry in France, and a general disaffection toward the subsurface industries. But also more problematic, the subsurface has become more an issue of environmental management related to mining, for example. And for the general public, as well as for the most of the policymakers, subsurface relates more to an environmental problem rather than a productive environment. So in the different figures, you can see that in many of the industries, coal, uranium extraction, oil and gas, everything went down in the 90s. So the subsurface became some way a depoliticized topic in France in the late 20th century. However, in the 2000 and in 2010s, there have been some attempt of renewal for the subsurface in France, but mostly they all failed. The first one was the attempt to develop shale gas in France, but in 2010 there have been a huge social mobilization against it. You can see on the graph on the right that it went from quite a marginal topic in the media, but in a positive way. Few articles about shale gas, but in a positive way. And then the social mobilization began, and the topic went toward an environmental problem, and it was mostly a negative coverage of the shale gas topic in France, resulting on a ban on fracking, and later on a progressive phase out on fossil fuel extraction in France. No, there have been no more oil and gas licenses authorization in France, and we are foreseeing the end of all oil and gas extraction by 2040. Same for mining. Mining was reviving in the 2010s, but there have been a lot of social mobilization against it, resulting in all the licenses being cancelled by the late 2010. And all those industries, so they went down for the reason I mentioned, mostly because they were framed as an environmental problem, but also there has been a problem of governance. The governance frame wasn't reformed until 2 years ago, and it's mostly a top-down governance with the licenses being granted by the state and no particular role for local communities, no upstream debate with the local population, and resulting in an opposition between the national orientation for the subsurface and the local protestation against it, because the local inhabitants, but also the local officials, weren't participating to what would be those subsurface industries. Even though there have been failure in the oil and gas industry, in the mining industry, we also have a development in the geothermal heat and power generation, and in carbon capture and storage with the pilot developed by Total in Chapelle de Rous near the Pyrenees. But even in those more positive example, what also came at the surface was the lack of planning. people in the communities where the project have been developed, uh, also inhabitants, but also local officials, they all complain about the lack of planning, uh, the absence of territorial vision. We have developed planning at the local scale, but then came a national project granted by the state, and everything is put under question. And also an absence of what I call temporal development for one mine. Is it one mine, or is it 10 mines, or is it more in the future? There's no vision on how should those industry being developed on the long term. So i- at the scale of the project, there have been many difficulties to make those local communities and those local officials understand what could be the vision for the future related to carbon capture and storage, but all subsurface industries. But in the past few years, there have been some reason to be hopeful. First of all, a reform of the mining regulation 2 years ago, which is some kind of catching up with the international guidelines related to the subsurface, because our mining regulation were quite old, because no project for the subsurface for 30 years, so no reason to reform it. Now it has been done. And also new um, new targets. The targets of carbon neutrality make CCS uh, more important for the French policymakers. And as I just said earlier, those subsurface industry were suffering from a lack of political interest. Nobody among policymakers were quite interested in supporting those kind of industry, especially for CC. I mean, administrative support, but no political support for it. And it changed 1 year ago, 18 months ago. President Macron make a speech, particularly targeting CCS and the importance of CCS for the French carbon neutrality. There have been emerging projects for CCS in France, but also for critical minerals, reports targeting the needs for the French economy to have some new mines on its territory, roadmaps of development, strategic committees such as the PREMI, which targets the critical minerals for France, and an endeavor to develop better planification for all those subsurface industry, not only for CCS, but general utilization of the subsurface, being minerals extraction, carbon storage, geothermal energy. And the goal is to develop a 5-year plan about the subsurface utilization. And every 5 years, we will have a new plan to put the needs in front of what could be extracted, what could be stored, and also an endeavor to develop interdisciplinary research project granted with 70 million euros for a nine years duration. And my main point is that figure. With some colleagues, we developed based on the development or non-development of carbon capture and storage in France. This figure explaining what should be the path toward the CCS development. So it's in French, but I will explain it. The first column, it's about the whole industry or whole technology, and the second one is about the project. And then the first line is about legitimacy, and the second one is the quality of implementation. And in our minds, every industry related to the subsurface, but basically many transition industry, should go from step 1 to step 4. And in what we observe, usually we only do steps 3 and 4, and there's no step 1 and 2 put in place at the beginning of any project. So the first step is to have to define the legitimacy of an industry, being CCS or another one. So for CCS, it's what is the purpose of CCS in a national transition for carbon neutrality, or what will be the goal to develop CCS in one country or another. Then we move to step two. What would be the frame of implementation of this industry? Who would be, uh, where would be those industry developed, with what kind of roadmaps and of development? Who would be the actors in charge of developing such industry? So it's the basic question in political science is who gets what, how, and when. So it's defining the governance frame before developing project. And then we move to the more basic steps 3 and 4, defining the legitimacy of one project. So we already have the debate about the general industry. Then we move to one specific project. And then we have this classical debate about the project in one location. And final step 4, the quality of implementation of this specific project. We put this in place because, as I said earlier, for CCS, we are still in steps 3 and 4, but we don't have this general debate in France about what would be the purpose of CCS in a general national plan for decarbonization. So there's a reason to be hopeful, but there are still hurdles on the way. As I just mentioned, if we compare mineral development and CCS in the past years, there have been no open public debate for CCS in France, despite our inputs into the debate. And CCS still is only discussed into experts arena and not with the general public. However, there have been new projects emerging in France about CCS, but again, we have only the debate at the scale of the project, not at the scale of the whole industry. So in our minds, it would be hard to have social acceptance if we don't start with the general debate about the whole industry. And the the, the reason we are quite pessimistic is that uh, the risk is that every project will have the general debate, and the opponents will seize the opportunity to have this whole debate at every project because the government or the administration do not organize such a general debate. So the opponents will seize the opportunity to develop this more general discussion about CCS at the scale of every project. So it makes the operator have to deal with a more general question that they cannot answer. So usually it went not very well for the project. On the other hand, we have such general debate on lithium extraction in France. It's a current public debate until July. So it's about one mine location, but the public debate is it's about the whole value chain of lithium in France, from extraction to battery production. So it's possible to have such a general debate, but in some cases they haven't been organized yet. But it doesn't mean that everything everything will be okay if we had such a general debate every time, because there are still conflicts about the land use, and I speak not about technical opposition between different industries, but there are many policies about transition, and they could be conflicting. Biodiversity preservation with mining, we have a policy about no artificialization of the land. Then we have new projects. So where should we put them? So anticipation and planning are important step toward the development of CCS and other subsurface industry, but there are still gaps between those objectives and the current state of affairs. I would uh, conclude on those on two important problems: the weak consensus on the shape of the subsurface industry, and I mean the role of the different actors. What is the role of the state, the administration, or public bodies and private companies? It is still not clear who should be in charge of developing such industries, and I think for the general public, it's important to know who is responsible for what in those kind of big industries. and also the divide between the national and the local. And it's still not clear who is deciding for those land planning use. And we have national policies, we also have local ones, and sometimes they do not match with each other. So it's still unclear what could be uh, uh, planning, including both the national scale and the local ones. So to conclude, the governance of subsurface utilization should rely on planning and prioritizing uses, and also defining the role of the different actors involved in those industry. And we hope to be able to make a better contribution to those debates with this current interdisciplinary project I'm participating into. And thank you for your attention.